Hello, everyone. I'm Kelsey Lemon, Senior Technical Marketing Manager for the Cloud Management Business Unit here at VMware, and I want to welcome you to today's session where I'm going to focus on day one activities for VMware Skyline. And in the course of doing so, I'm going to answer some frequently asked questions that I often hear from those of you who are interested in the service but want more information before taking the next step to install and configure it. And those burning day one questions are, what is Skyline? What are its key benefits? How much does it cost? What's under the hood in terms of system requirements and system architecture? And finally, how do I get started? And that last question would be the bulk of this session today. I'm going to demystify the installation and configuration process of VMware Skyline by walking through the entire process from end to end. So let's start with what is it? I recently conducted a survey on VMware Skyline where one of the responses was, I'd like someone to explain VMware Skyline in the most simplest terms. Explain it to me like I'm a baby. Well, I'm not sure if I can do it exactly to that level, but when I saw that response, I thought it was a perfect opportunity to share an analogy that one of VMware's top experts, Nick Fritz, shared with me. He likened it to a vehicle recall service where, from time to time, your manufacturer may reach out and let you know that they are aware of the fact that a specific make and model of your car has the potential to experience an issue, say, for example, with an airbag or perhaps the seat belts, and that they have a recommendation on fixing it, which most often, right, is taking your car to the dealership to fix it. And the recall itself isn't saying that it will happen or that the issue has already happened. They're just letting you know that the potential is there. And depending on the severity of the issue, right, you may choose to ignore the recall message or you may take your car in for service. And with that being said, think of Skyline as a recall for your VMware supported products. Once Skyline becomes aware of the potential issues, based on version, build, and configuration information about the VMware products that the service is monitoring, the service will notify you of the issue, tell you the specific objects that could be impacted, and then give you recommendations on how to prevent that potential issue from becoming a real issue. So say, for example, right, based on the configuration of your environment, Skyline may say that it's susceptible to PSOD and then give you recommendations or prescribe ways to fix it with links to KBs. Or perhaps Skyline will notify you of some security issues that your environment is vulnerable to, and those recommendations are driven by documentation from our security advisory site, VMware Validated Design, or even VCF design decision. And that's the proactive side of Skyline. But now let's say that you did get that recall notice, but you didn't take action to proactively resolve it on your own. And now that potential issue is now a real problem that you need to react to. Skyline can assist customers here as well. So for those times when you do experience an issue and you need to get help from VMware Global Support Services, customers traditionally would have to manually send those log bundles via FTP or Customer Connect. Well, Skyline automates that log bundle transfer process. And when it comes to why customers are caring about the services, obviously perception of business value can vary and be very subjective. But if I could go back to the vehicle recall analogy, and say, for example, you did experience an issue with your seat belts, you could rightfully ask, well, if the manufacturer knew that this could potentially happen to me, why didn't they make me aware of it? I could have actually taken action to avoid it. Well, the same is true with VMware Skyline. It brings a similar level of awareness via its findings and its recommendations, whether it's a configuration change that needs to happen or a patch to mitigate that risk. A really good example is a security vulnerability, right? From time to time, VMware will release a new advisory backed by some CVEs. And if you have a security team or maybe a security person that's more focused on making sure that holes are filled, firewall ports are closed, environments are patched and closed, they may come to you and say, Are we vulnerable to this new advisory? Well, within VMware Skyline, we'll do that automatic identification for you so that you can answer either no or yes, we are vulnerable and here are the objects that are at risk. And we've already touched base on the time-saving aspect of VMware Skyline's log assist feature. It automates again that log transfer process, and customers are saying that it's 17 times faster than the traditional log transfer process. And here's the best part. Skyline is free with any eligible subscription account. So now that I've sold you all on the service, I'm sure you're all asking, how do I get started? Well, the first step is that you need to install and configure the Skyline Collector, which is a virtual appliance that collects product usage data and support bundles. The appliance itself is minimum in size. I mean, we're talking kilobytes here, and that it's also delivered in an OVF format. So it's the standard deploy OVF template from within vCenter Server, and it's actually built on Photon OS. We support thin provisioning, and that 87 gigs is a flat disk, meaning that it won't ever grow larger than that. So you won't have to say, hey, we have a large environment here and we're going to be collecting a lot of data. So I have to make sure that we're adding additional disks or VMDKs to the collector. That's not how it works actually. Basically it collects data and then it sends that data to VMware. And once VMware has that data is then removed from the collector. So 87 gigs is as large as that disk will ever get. And if you prefer to allocate that space up front, you can also do that with thick provisioning. Another requirement is a cloud services organization. Skyline is a SaaS-based service that's delivered to you, and the collector is the on-prem component that our customers have to deploy. The organization, you can think of that as the platform where Skyline Advisor is delivered and also where you consume findings and recommendations and also use log assist. And that cloud services organization has components to it such as access management, billing, and developer features. You can also do federation to your local Active Directory and also use multi-factor authentication. So again, you can think of the cloud services organization as a container that sits inside of VMware Cloud Services and that you can then use or consume additional services, say for example, services like vRealize Operations Cloud, VMware Cloud on AWS as well. All of these services would be inside a single organization and then you can divvy up access to those services. And then finally, we have the getting started workflow, which in and of itself is a three-step process. You create a cloud services organization if you haven't already done so, and then you download, install, and register the collector appliance. And so from a high-level diagram point of view, the architecture looks like this. We have the cloud services organization that you'll create, and a component of that is users, specifically users that will have access to the Skyline Advisor service. And again, both of them sit within the cloud services organization that you're going to create. And the organization will have one or several collectors registered to it. And the collectors, again, are installed on your data center on-prem. And then you can add various endpoints for the collector to monitor. This diagram here shows one collector, but there may be times where multiple collectors are needed. So say, for example, you have geographically dispersed data centers, right? One in California and one in New York, and you have VMware products and services in each of those locations. Since the collector's primary purpose is to send data, you wouldn't want to deploy a collector in California that's collecting data from a vCenter in New York. Well, this in and of itself would theoretically work since the product uses data that gets collected is small, again, kilobytes in size, but where you could potentially run into issues is when you need to send a support bundle. As you know, those can be many megabytes to gigabytes in size, and so to prevent transmission issues, we simply say put a collector in each of those regions. So in short, that collector should be where your vCenter server is. And since the collectors are registered to the same cloud services organization, you wouldn't have to log into two different organizations to see all the findings and recommendations that Skyline provides. All that data would be presented in a single pane of glass point of view. And another question we get is often around configuration maximums. And I'm happy to say that today, we don't have any configuration maximums for the Skyline collector. We have seen customers that have added 25 vCenter servers to a single collector without any issues at all. And we also support many different types of products. All are registered to a single collector. So say, for example, you could have 10 vCenter servers, 10 NSX managers, and 5 Horizon Connection servers, all added to a single collector. And now for the demo. I want to point out again that Skyline is free for all customers with an eligible contract or subscription. So ensure that you are using a My VMware account that is associated with the highest tier of support entitlement that your company has purchased. And also be sure that your My VMware account is associated with all entitlement accounts or EAs where you open support requests today. And now with that out of the way, I'm going to start with the first step of the installation and configuration process by creating a cloud services organization. And so to do that, go to the link here on the screen. And after clicking Get Started, a new browser page or tab will open, and you're going to be asked to sign in with your My VMware account. Now, if you have an existing My VMware account, you can use those same credentials, your email address and password to sign into cloud services. And if you have an existing VMware Cloud Services organization already set up, you can associate it to Skyline. To do that, simply click the radio button next to the organization to add the Skyline Advisor service to it. But for the sake of this demo, I am going to create a completely new organization by selecting Add Service to Another Org, and then by clicking Create Organization. I'm going to enter an organization name. I'm going to be calling my organization TMM0, but I recommend that you name your organization as something a little bit more meaningful, something that can easily be referenced by both you and VMware. So for example, name your organization after your company or business name, and you can also append a line of business, division, or team to the end of your company or business name. Now at this point, I'll review the cloud services terms of service and then click the checkbox. And after I've clicked Create Organization and complete sign up, my new cloud services organization setup is done. And now I'm going to go to the next step by transitioning to the actual Skyline setup wizard by clicking the Continue button. We often get a lot of questions about roles and permissions when it comes to Skyline, so I want to point out that by default, my account is assigned to the Skyline user service role for Skyline Advisor, but in order to proceed with the Skyline setup wizard, my account must be assigned to the Skyline Administrator Service role for Skyline Advisor. So by clicking Continue, VMware Cloud Services will automatically change my service role from user to administrator. Now, for more information on the key differences between these two roles, check out my Day 2 Mastery Series video on how to add more users to Skyline. Okay, so with that done, now let's continue to the next step of the Skyline setup process and associate my entitlement account with the cloud services organization that I just set up. And in my case, I only have one entitlement account associated with my organization, so it's linked by default. And entitlement account linking is important because it impacts support request visibility. When you open a support request, that support request is associated with an entitlement account. Within Skyline, if you open a support request under an entitlement account that is not linked with your cloud services organization, then that support request will not be visible within Skyline Advisor. And as you can imagine, if there is no support request visible within the advisor itself, you won't be able to leverage Skyline's Log Assist feature to transfer log bundles to VMware for your support requests. And so with that being said, you should link any and all entitlement accounts to your cloud services organization for which support requests are open under. Okay, so with that out of the way, I'm going to go to the next step of the overall installation and configuration process, which is collector setup. And this is where I'm going to download, install, and configure my Skyline collector for the environment that I want the service to monitor. And to initiate this step, I'm going to simply, you guessed it, click the collector setup button. And as you can see here, the collector page provides a hyperlink to the Skyline planning and deployment guide, which essentially describes the same steps that I'm covering in today's session, as well as a link to download the Skyline collector from my VMware. And I'm going to do things a little bit out of order from the recommended steps on this page. I'm actually going to copy the token key that I need to register the collector first, and then I'm going to paste it to Notepad so I won't forget it. And this key is needed to register and associate the Skyline collector to my newly created cloud services organization. Again, that name is TMM0. And by the way, the token keys expire in 12 hours, but the typical installation takes on average less than 30 minutes. And if for some reason you get sidetracked and you don't complete collector setup within that allocated time, you can always come back to this page and generate a new token key. Now I'm going to click the link to download the Skyline Virtual Appliance, which comes in OVA format, and I'm going to save it in a location that I can easily access for deployment within my vSphere client. Now with the collector downloaded, let's walk through the process of deploying my Skyline collector within my vCenter on vSphere. Earlier you heard me say that the collector appliance is available in an OVA format, but it can be deployed in vCenter Server by using the Deploy OVF template wizard. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to log into my vSphere client with an account that has virtual machine deploy permissions. And in the vSphere client, I can either select an inventory object that is a valid parent object of a virtual machine, such as a folder, cluster, resource pool, or host. And then I can click Actions to deploy the OVF template. And so to speed things up a bit, I'm actually going to right-click on the object where I want to deploy the Skyline collector, and then I'm going to choose Deploy OVF template. Now I'm going to browse to the Skyline Collector OVA and click Next. At this point, I'll be asked to enter a user-friendly name for the Skyline Collector, and then I'm going to select a deployment location before clicking Next. Now I'm going to select a location, again, such as a host, cluster, or resource pool where I want to run the Skyline collector. And when I click Next, I'm going to be given an opportunity to review the template details. And after a quick review, I'll click Next, where I'll then be prompted to review and accept the VMware End User License Agreement, the EULA. I'll click Next to proceed to the next step of the wizard, which will ask me to select a location to store the Skyline Collector virtual disk files, as well as specify its virtual disk format via this drop down here. Earlier you heard me talk about the differences between thick and thin provisions, and this is where you're going to specify that. And now, if applicable, you'll also be asked to select a VM storage policy. If so, select one from the drop-down menu before clicking Next. And as I move on to the network configuration of the collector, I'll need to select a network that provides me the appropriate network access. So I'll select a destination network from the drop-down menu for the Skyline collector. Now I'll select an IP protocol from the drop-down menu as well. And if you're wondering, Skyline collector supports both IPv4 and IPv6. And when that is done, I'm going to go ahead and click Next. At this point, I can customize the deployment of the Skyline collector. And customization includes creating a root password, which is required, as well as the option of specifying a static IP address. Now, since the root password is required, I'll create one, making sure that I meet the minimum 8-character requirement. The collector itself can have a dynamic IP address, and if you want this, all you have to do is leave all of the networking properties empty. But I'm going to configure a static IP address, so I'm going to enter the information specific to my network, such as the default gateway, DNS, network IP address for my collector, as well as a net mask. I should also point out that the appliance must resolve the host names for vCenter Server, single sign-on authentication, and any additional products in order to successfully complete the customization template. And clicking Next will confirm if these requirements are resolved. Now with this complete, I can review the configuration data that I provided for the Skyline collector and click Finish to complete deployment. At this point, the Skyline Collector virtual appliance will begin deploying in the vCenter server, and I can view that virtual appliance deployment progress within my vSphere client task panel. Now I can power on the Skyline Collector within vCenter server, and to do this, I'll simply select the Skyline Collector virtual appliance that I deployed, again using that OVF deploy template wizard, and then I'm going to select power on. And after it's been powered on, I can view the IP address of the Skyline collector on the Summary tab of the vSphere client. And if you don't see this, you may have to refresh the vSphere client to view the IP address of the Skyline collector after it's been powered on. At this point, I can use that IP address to access the Skyline virtual appliance through a web browser and start connecting endpoints in the next step. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to open my web browser and enter the collector's IP address. A browser security warning may appear when accessing the Skyline collector, and this warning is expected behavior. And since this is the first time that I've accessed the collector, I'll enter the default login name of admin and the default password, which interestingly enough is named default. Then I'll be prompted to create a new password before being asked to log into the collector webpage again. Now that I'm back in, I'm going to go through the last of my configuration steps by ensuring that my collector is connecting to VMware by enabling hostname verification. And if I've done everything correctly up until this point, clicking on Test and Save should indicate that the collector is properly connecting to VMware. And before I continue, I want to point out that I also have the option to enable proxy. And if I did that, I'd be asked to enter the proxy IP address and port number, as well as proxy username and password. The next step is to agree to participate in the Customer Experience Improvement Program, or CEIP. And as many of you know, as part of CEIP, VMware collects technical information on product usage and uses that basically as a means to improve our products and services. And it's also used to advise you on how to best deploy our services and products. So by configuring your VMware products to participate in the Skyline service, each product will be enabled to send product usage data to the Skyline service as part of CEIP. Now I have to register my Skyline collector with my cloud services organization that I created earlier in the demo. This is done by typing or pasting the registration token in the space provided here. So I'm going to go back to Notepad and use that token key that I copied earlier. And then I'm going to click Register Collector before clicking Continue. Now that this collector is registered with my newly created cloud services organization, it can't be registered to another cloud services organization without deregistering it first within the Skyline Advisor service. And at this point, I'll enter a friendly name for my Skyline collector for easy identification. The same naming recommendation applies, make it meaningful, as this name will make it easier for VMware Global Support Services to communicate information about the Skyline Collector with you. Now I'll have to choose whether to enable the Skyline Collector to automatically upgrade when new versions of the collector become available. When a new version of the collector is made available, there are two options for upgrading your Skyline collector. First, you can manually upgrade your Skyline collector using the Skyline Collector Virtual Appliance Management Interface, the VAMI. Or two, you can automatically upgrade your Skyline collector by enabling auto upgrade within the Skyline collector. Enabling auto upgrade means that you no longer have to complete the manual process of checking for updates or manually upgrading your collector, and I highly recommend using this option here. Now, to enable auto upgrade, I'll simply toggle this switch here to the right. Now I can use the drop down to pick a day of the week for the Skyline collector to check for and install updates when they become available. And now for the last required part of the collector configuration, and that is to add my vCenter server to it. So I'll need to enter the fully qualified domain name or IP address of that vCenter server, as well as an account username and password for connecting to that vCenter server from my Skyline collector. The account itself must have the minimum required privileges that are sufficient for collecting product usage data and transferring log bundles with log assist, and those privileges are listed here. The next step of endpoint configurations are optional for the initial installation and configuration of the collector, but I'm going to go ahead and walk through them. But you can always come back later and add these endpoints by using the bulk product operations feature that I demonstrate in my day 2 bulk operations demo. Now to add NSXV and T to the collector, again, simply enter the fully qualified domain name or IP address to the NSX manager, enter an account username and password that will allow the Skyline collector to connect to the NSX manager. If the account has an NSX auditor level permission, the collector will only be able to collect product usage data. But if you want to leverage log assist, be sure to use an account with either the NSX administrator or NSX enterprise permissions for both NSXV and NSXT respectively. Now to complete the addition of the NSX manager to the Skyline collector, at this point simply click add. Now if you want to add Horizon connection servers to your Skyline collector, again simply enter the fully qualified domain name or IP address of that Horizon connection server. Enter an account username and password that will allow the collector to connect to the Horizon connection server, and this account must have administrator read-only level permissions. And to complete the addition of the Horizon connection server to the collector, again simply click add. Now to add a vRealize Operations Manager to the Skyline collector, it's pretty much the same process. Enter the fully qualified domain name and IP address of that vRealize Operations Manager. Enter an account username and password that will allow the collector to connect to the vRealize Operations Manager. And this account must have the minimum vRealize Operations read-only role level to successfully connect. And if you're using an Active Directory account, enter the username only. You do not need to provide the domain name, just enter the password. To use a domain user account for adding the vRealize Operations Manager to the Skyline collector, enter the authentication source name as a domain name. Now it's also important to note that at this time, Skyline Log Assist does not support the transferring of vRealize Operations Manager support bundles to VMware GSS. Any vRealize Operations Manager added to the collector will not appear within the Log Assist page of the Skyline Advisor. Finally, you can also add VMware Cloud Foundation to the Skyline collector. All you have to do is enter the fully qualified domain name or address of the SDDC manager, enter an account username and password again that will allow the collector to connect to the SDDC manager. And this account must have the minimum SDDC manager viewer role. It needs to have that permission in order to be added. And when I'm done with the configuration of the collector, I'll click Finish to review the endpoints that I've connected, as well as get the overall status of the collector itself. And now that the endpoint configurations are done, I can finish the final step before logging into the Skyline Advisor service. I'm going to select my new organization, and I'm going to launch it. And I'm going to be greeted with a welcome message. And after confirming that I understand the amount of time that it will take before my data appears in my environment, I can access my Skyline Advisor dashboard.